Welcome to Stop Mixing Sense, where we explore the overlap between music, language, and our anatomy in order to reverse engineer our mindset on mixing and ultimately realize that the answers have been within ourselves all along. In our last video, we gained an awareness of where we feel sound in our bodies, and we discovered that we perceive low frequencies, bass, lower in our bodies, like our chest or lower, and perceive high frequencies, like treble, higher in our bodies, because our tiny little ear hairs are more sensitive to tiny little airwaves. And if you look at a speaker, you'll see they're already designed with this in mind. Ever notice that the treble output, or tweeter, is always way smaller than the bass output? This is not only because the low frequency waves are larger, but also because we, as humans, need lower frequencies to have a greater dB level to perceive them at a comparable loudness relative to the treble. It's almost as if we're God and the speakers were designed in our image, with the high frequencies coming out of the top and the low frequencies coming out of the bottom, just like us. But then a little voice inside you says, wait, if we're mixing, wouldn't this orientation compound the limitations and biases we already have as humans? Because if we're more sensitive to high frequencies higher in our bodies and more sensitive to lower frequencies lower in our bodies, wouldn't speakers with this orientation make our higher frequencies sound even brighter and our low frequencies sound even bassier to us? Which can lead to overcorrection, aka thinking something is too bright and cutting the highs, or thinking something is too dark and cutting the lows. So how do we account for this? Well, some recommend turning your speakers sideways if you're mixing, instead of keeping them upright so that both the high and the low frequencies are level with one another, making sure they're level with your ears, wherever your head is when you sit down to mix. I myself have done this, but then a little voice says, wait, but from the listener's perspective, if most other people will have their speakers upright when they listen to my music, why would I turn my speakers sideways for accuracy in mixing? Which will then inevitably lead you down the rabbit hole of how there's literally no way to control for how many different possible playback devices or rooms or environments or individual ears themselves there are. And you'll never have any idea where your listener's head is relative to whatever speaker they have or what direction it's facing when they're listening to your song. And chances are, no matter what, they won't care. So at some point, you really do just have to let it go. And coming from someone who was paralyzed by the idea of my mix either being too dark or too bright, someone who thought leaning in any obvious direction of that spectrum would immediately reveal me as an amateur. It was my greatest fear. But the reality is there are plenty of mixes out there that lean darker, and plenty of mixes out there that lean brighter, depending on what the song calls for. And what the song calls for is up to the producer. And in this case, that's you. But how do you know what the song calls for? That's a whole nother can of worms. We'll get there soon, I promise. But not now. We find ourselves bound by our anatomy yet again for today's topic. Perceived loudness. Perceived loudness. Because bass frequency waves are long and slow, we're better at feeling these frequencies within our bodies. But because high frequency waves are short and fast, and our little tiny ear hairs are much more sensitive to and able to conduct these kinds of vibrations, due to our better ability to pick up this movement, which we call sound, these kinds of vibrations will always seem louder to us than these kinds of vibrations. Which means that even if this sound and this sound were played at the exact same volume or dB level, due to the limitations of the human form, we will always perceive the high frequency sound as significantly louder than the low frequency sound, regardless of their actual volume or what their dB level on the meter might tell us. Think of an electric guitar and a bass playing the exact same note in the same octave at the same volume. Now, without even hearing anything yet, and taking into account your mental schema of what a guitar sounds like and what a bass sounds like, try to imagine the loudest possible electric guitar and then the loudest possible bass. You're there? You're experiencing it? Even if it's just in your mind, I'm willing to bet that loudest possible guitar in your head went something like "Meow," probably characterized by words like aggressive or shrill, and the loudest possible bass probably went something like whose sound you're struggling to describe in words. Because even in this hypothetical example of a sound in your head, you know that the feeling of the low frequency energy in your chest is a better descriptor for bass. Some of you may even have had a vivid enough imagination to imagine some distortion, like that crunchy part when a bass is too loud for its speakers, but that doesn't count. Distortion takes place in the higher frequencies and happens as a result of the playback device. It's not my fault your imaginary speakers weren't powerful enough to handle your imaginary loudest possible bass in your mind. So here we have the same note, a G, played on an electric guitar and a bass, both peaking on the meter at the same level. But the shape of this EQ curve here, which by the way is called a Harmon curve, and nobody seems to know this, or at least no one ever seems to say it, and then one day you just find yourself making mixing videos and then the word EQ curve comes out of your mouth and you think, is that really what that's called? Is that really how you say that? The Harmon curve here is reflecting qualities not only of the pitch of the sound, but of how much high frequency or low frequency energy a sound has. Due to the increased activity of a guitar on the kiki end of the spectrum compared to the buba end of the spectrum, humans of all shapes and sizes and preferences and different favorite music genres will agree and seem to hear the guitar as louder than the bass, whether we're conscious of it or not, no matter who we are, where we're from, what we did. Our human form makes high-frequency sounds seem more prominent to us, and therefore louder in a mix. But that's a key word, seem. This means we can't rely on our eyes when we're looking at an EQ or a meter. Volume is an illusion. Perceived loudness is much more important, and I'll prove it. All right, so we perceive high frequencies louder than low frequencies. Mix accordingly. Check. What else contributes to our perception of loudness? There's a lot more to perceived loudness than meets the eye, so let's keep going. Allow me to introduce, at long last, compression. Not really at long last, but I just said all that stuff about how everybody's first search, when they're first starting to learn to mix is like, what is compressor? Well, you're ready. Here we have a waveform of the same hypothetical sound, before and after compression. In the before compression stage, we have some obvious spikes, some high peaks, like nails sticking unevenly out of a board. In the after compression stage, it looks like the spikes have been sanded down. Let's say this hypothetical sound is a drum. If we compress the drums, we bring down the volume of their peaks, and in turn, we can turn the overall sound up, which we will perceive as fuller, and yes, louder. But why do we do this? Well, we don't want the drums to sound like they're just poking through the mix. Don't be fooled by their spiky peaks. Drums can still sound quiet in a mix, especially in the midst of all the other parts going on. Because the nature of a drum sound is a huge spike at the beginning and a tail that disappears almost instantly, a lot of the details of the drum hit will disappear when competing with other elements in the mix. All you'll hear is that poke of the initial onset of the drum hit. Compression allows us to split the difference and shave off some of the volume from that peak to meet the rest of the decay of the hit, and we can then turn the overall volume up. Because we perceive fuller as louder, compression helps us create the illusion of more loudness without an actual increase in decibels, although most people also increase the decibels. So if you've ever had your master volume tell you that you're peaking on every snare hit, but you still feel like the drums aren't loud enough, maybe it's time to trim those peaks. But it's not about which instrument can get the loudest. It's about all the instruments, regardless of frequency range, working together as a team in service of the song, so that no frequency range is too abundant or too scarce, not too bright, not too dark, just right. But it does make us wonder, why do we have a guitar, bass, keyboard, and drums in a band? Why is there a cello, viola, and violins in a string quartet? Why can we walk across a bed of nails, but if we stepped on one nail, we'd have a hole in our foot? Stay with me. More on this extended metaphor in the next video.